talk without shoes, and one of the great things about MindValley is being able to not wear them. However, I would like to just quickly correct one thing. Actually, the Teller acted quite call me the cleverest child in the world. They posed it as a question, so looks like that's still up for debate. And my answer is an unequivocal no. I know a lot of people who are way smarter than me, and probably some of you in the audience could give me a run for my money on that very question. So I want to quickly also add one more disclaimer, which is that being your average high school student, I procrastinate. I procrastinate like nobody else procrastinates, and so when they ask for a title for this talk, I might or might not have given a title that does not entirely accurately reflect everything I want to talk about. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I will be talking about youth empowerment, and I will be talking about the digital age, but I will also be talking about some other things. So bear with me. I hope you don't mind too much. Now, I think that improvisation is honestly one of the coolest things about being able to do talks like this, and so I really look forward to seeing your tweets and maybe even debating or working in some of your opinions and what have you. Now, I want to start with a quote, because there's a beautiful passage from a book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Liu, and I had the privilege of reading it in a place which is rather incongruous for finding good pieces of writing, the advanced place in the English language and composition test. So excuse the dig at the College Board, you can tell I'm not a big fan of standardized tests. But the passage began by describing the trend of parents purchasing rear seat and dash entertainment products to keep kids entertained when they were on road trips for the sake of a little backseat peace. And one of my favorite paragraphs, the quote, went like this: "Why do so many people no longer consider the physical world worth watching? The highway's edges may not be postcard perfect, but for a century, children's early understanding of how cities and nature fit together was gained from the back seat. The empty farmhouse at the edge of the subdivision, the woods and fields and water beyond the seamy edges, all that was and is still available to the eye. This was the landscape that we watched as children. It was our drive-by movie. In our useful boredom, we used our fingers to draw pictures on fogged glass as we watched telephone poles tick by. We saw birds on the wires and combines in the fields. We were fascinated with roadkill, and we counted cows and birds and horses and coyotes and shaving cream signs. We stared with a kind of reverence at the horizon as thunderheads and dancing rain moved with us. We held our little plastic cars against the glass and pretended that they, too, were racing towards some unknown destination. We considered the past and dreamed of the future and watched it all go by in the blink of an eye." Contrast this to my experience on the bus here from Singapore, which is a 5-hour trip, some of you might have taken, and I had the distinct privilege of sitting behind a young boy, about 5 rows behind me actually, who was watching Gangnam Style on loop on his iPad. I say distinct privilege because the first time was admittedly pretty droll. I was singing along. But the fifth occurrence made me a little angry. Okay, I wanted to call down curses upon Apple and smash the iPad on the little Tyson. I should maybe think about those anger management classes. What was interesting though was when I noticed that this kid wasn't watching Gangnam Style because he suddenly discovered his affinity for K-pop. It was because his mom or aunt or caretaker, whoever's lap he was sitting on, had put it on, ostensibly to hold his attention to this long bus ride. And indeed, more and more often, just as that article that I read on the AP Lang test profile, I'm seeing devices being used this way. Momentary diversions to keep kids from whining or misbehaving or asking questions. Are we there yet? Who cares if on-screen cat talking Tom is still purring, if kiwis are still being sliced in Fruit Ninja, or kamikaze birds are still, well, being kamikaze birds in Angry Birds? This is so different from what I experienced growing up. And no, I'm not a Luddite about to launch into a diatribe about how we should reject all technology and that some of you are doing the work of the devil. I mean, you might be, but probably not here. But what I do see as this crucial contrast between my childhood with technology versus the experience of that kid 5 rows ahead of me watching Gangnam Style is this. In my day, start any sentence with those 3 words, "in my day," by the way, and you have instant curmudgeon mix. In my day, the things that my sister and I did on the computer were more often collaborative. Things we did with our parents or with each other instead of mechanisms to distract us from them. Moreover, our purposes were always far bored, I would make something. I would write a poem. I would write a dialogue, put together styrofoam and make a castle, or make an origami figure. Now, of course, if a kid like that when on the bus gets bored, there's an app for that. And this is all very good, except for the fact that the drawing away of that child from their boredom and the creativity out of necessity that might result means creating a consumer, but losing a producer. Whether in education reform or organizational management, it's always vital to ask not just what kind of consumers or students or clients we are creating, but if you're creating producers and teachers. Just as the web shifted from making content simply for our consumption to interactivity and enabling us to be authors, we need to change our perceptions, especially of young people like me and that boy on the bus, away from how do we teach this, how do we make this interesting or distracting enough, and toward how can we enable the students to be the teachers, and how can we make things that encourage the users to make things. Ineloquent as it may be, that's basically the main point of the talk. Let's make things that get people to make things, material or immaterial. And this isn't just an empty ask. I'm seeing it already beginning to happen. If we focus on education as an example, you have TED 2013 prize winner Sugata Mitra, whose hole-in-the-wall experiment showed that street kids in Hyderabad, when equipped with a shared computer, could learn effectively in groups without an adult standing by. For those of you who have seen his talk, you might recall this gem of a quote. So he walks up to the group, and it's been a couple months since the computer was put in, and he asks them, "What have you learned?" They respond dismally, "Nothing." So he says, "For 2 months, you were looking at stuff that you didn't understand?" And one girl raises her hand and says, "Apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing." Obviously, that's a little more than nothing, and probably more than some sophomore biology students could tell you. The possibility for the students to become the teachers is exemplified not only in experiments like Dr. Mitra's hole in the wall, but every day by young people who are producing Khan Academy-esque videos. Who here has seen a Khan Academy video? Seeing a lot of raised hands, so for those of you who haven't, definitely do Google it. Now there are kids doing the same thing. Kids at mathtrain.tv are making math tutorials. A girl named Eva Reidenhauer is producing poetry videos and lessons, and there are countless more examples. I like to think that I was something of a pioneer in this field, seeing as I began teaching when I was 7 years old, back when my first book, Flying Fingers, debuted. And back then, I had no fancy pedagogical terms in my head. Educational best practices, it was a distant buzzword. And so basically, what I knew of education was whiteboards and PowerPoints. So I dutifully constructed these horrifying PowerPoint presentations. Horrifying not because the content was bad, but because I worked under the misguided impression that number of bullet points positively correlated to goodness. And I would march out in front of these assemblies with my horrifying PowerPoints and get ready to teach. What I saw after a while, time and time again, was that number of bullet points only positively correlated to glazed over eyes and fidgeting. But I saw something else. The stuffed animals and collaborative writing positively correlated to magic. You see, a big part of my author visits to these schools was motivating students to write, and to my mind, it made no sense to talk at them about writing without actually doing it with them. You can guess what my impression is in most standard issue English classes. So when presenting to young kids, I would bring a box of trusty stuffed animals, and we'd pull them out, and one by one, I'd say, let's write a story together using these as characters. And it surprised me how much they appreciated the chance to do something so simple, to create characters, to develop settings, to think about a plot. And then I realized that for many of these kids, this was an incredibly rare break from a steady diet of fill-in-the-blank assignments. My friend Priya Ganesan gave a talk at the TEDx event I organized, TEDx Writing, in which she told an anecdote. Her middle school class was given an assignment to write a poem about winter, but half of the words were already provided for them. I mean, is that poetry? And so the students in these presentations really had something unique when they were given the chance to go wild with their imaginations. The chance to come up with our own worlds and to use our own words, that was liberating. And they exploited that liberty to the highest possibility in really admirable ways, coming up with characters who could be as ridiculous as they were beautiful. And once I remember video conferencing with this class in New York where we decided for whatever reason to write a poem about a ninja with stress and bladder control issues. It was beautiful. My PowerPoints may have been crimes against humanity, but I like to think that I made up for them by giving these students a brief chance to the authors in a school system that expects them usually to work in a far more circumscribed way. Unfortunately, I think that not a whole lot sometimes changes from our middle and high school days. We're still expected to fill in blanks when we get to college and be adults, maybe not on worksheets, but in life. Entrepreneurs like Vishen are all too rare, and I think that it takes guts to work outside of the status quo to an extent that makes me really admire people who do that. I had the privilege of visiting the MIT Media Lab in Boston when I was there on a trip, and I had the chance to meet with Jia Qi. She's an innovator who's combining high and low tech to create enthralling visual displays, art pieces. One of her creations is a traditional Chinese painting under which lies a network of circuits. When you blow on the painting on one of the dandelions, the seeds will scatter because of the LEDs under the surface. I was absolutely transfixed as she walked us through a demonstration. And if you take a look at the video, which I think we have here, you can see examples. on a dandelion, and I think at the moment when I did that, it just, I don't know, it felt like childhood somehow encapsulated in one moment, but it was incredibly cool. And the best part actually wasn't just being able to do that, but when she handed us a box with a bunch of circuits and some batteries in it and told us to make things. Basically, it was a way for us to build our own inventions. And to tell the truth, I've been a little scared to touch it, but I will go home and I look forward to trying. So the MIT Media Lab, where that came from, has been home to countless inventions. One, Dr. Mitchell Resnick's Scratch, makes computer coding friendly thanks to animated sprites. I know that it's inspired an entire generation of programmers to discover their love of coding. Now, as I walked out of the MIT Media Lab, which is this big, white glass building in the middle of Cambridge, the thought occurred to me, why couldn't school be like this? Maybe not as cool as that building, but definitely that same focus on creation instead of always consuming. It reinforced my existing beliefs about where our schools need to be going. When I met Vishen at the X Prize event in California, I got to know MindValley's approach on philosophy, which also set me thinking, why aren't schools structured like this? Why couldn't I be as happy to walk into high school as employees are here? Just like MindValley gives everyone here the power and freedom to contribute and have an impact from individual actions and efforts, and there's an R2-D2 trash can, I think that learning should be something that students seek of our own volition, not something like a job that we feel is forced on us, not something where we fill in the blanks, and not something where we have no R2-D2 trash cans. I am mourning the absence of that very much. Of course, regardless of what we know could be done better in education, many of us, probably some of you in the audience, are still stuck in an outdated model when we know that doesn't work, and one that values whether we know the right answers instead of whether we know how to ask the right questions. But if we can't change our own system right now, then we can definitely work outside of it. In my case, that's what happened with organizing TEDx Redmond, the By Youth for Youth event that I've directed for 3 years in a row now. We pride ourselves on being one of the only TEDx events to have an all-youth lineup of speakers as well as a planning committee. You might think that this is precisely the kind of thing that schools in our area would love to participate in, but that wasn't the case the first year when we called up people and asked them to share it with students. We met countless obstacles and dead ends, lots of we'll sees on the phone from our principals and everyone in the educational community. All this surprised me, but it didn't discourage us. And we found success that first year anyway, with over 700 people coming to show up. I give TED a lot of credit for shifting away from the model of being primarily focused on putting content out there for people to consume. I mean, everybody knows and loves TED Talks. But one of the greatest things to me about TED as an organization is the fact that there's really a do-it-yourself attitude that is spread through the TEDx program and through TEDx event organizers. And this is one of the best things about organizing grassroots creation. Empowerment. Yes, I finally did get around to the empowerment that I know was promised in the title. It's the topic of empowerment that brings me to tell a story that I grew up with as a bookwormish girl in rainy Seattle who loved devouring Greek mythology. Some of you might know the story of Prometheus. So he lived up on Mount Olympus with the gods, but went to live amongst men and quickly noticed that they were unhappy. He found them living in caves and in holes of the earth, shivering with cold, dying of starvation, hunted by wild beasts and one another. If only they had fire, said Prometheus to himself. Without fire, they are worse off than the beasts. Prometheus went to Zeus, king of the gods, and begged him to give fire to the people. I will not, said Zeus, not one spark will I share with them. Prometheus didn't answer, but he had set his mind on helping mankind, and he did not give up. So as he was walking by the seashore, he saw a tall stalk of fennel. He broke it off and saw that it would burn slowly and stay alight for a long time. He carried the stalk with him as he began a long journey up Mount Olympus. Mankind shall have fire, despite what Zeus has decided, he said to himself. And with that thought, he snuck quietly into Zeus's own domain and stole a spark of fire from his lightning bolt. And so Prometheus hurried back to his own land, and he carried with him the precious spark hidden in the hollow center of the plant. The people I know who have taken it into their own hands to make things, whether lessons, apps, events, or high-tech artwork, have the world in their hands ready for the shaping. So I challenge you to ask yourself, Do you want to do things that people merely consume, watch, laugh at? Or do you want to be like Prometheus, bringing us the gift of fire from the gods, so that we may all see what may be illuminated in the flickering light? Thank you.
So what we're going to do now is